Today on the show, it's our fourth and final World Cup edition Club Spotlight. We've gone through all the debutant nations at the 2026 FIFA World Cup North America. We talked about Curaçao. We talked about Cabo Verde. That went pretty well. We talked about Jordan. Less well. Finally, we were talking about the ex-Soviet Central Asian nation of Uzbekistan. It's pretty interesting. Not a country you probably know much about, nor its footballing history. I'm going to bring that all to David coming up after the jingle. Live from San Jose, California, and Brooklyn, New York, it is the Any Given Thursday podcast, our very last World Cup Club Spotlight, Uzbek edition. Are you excited to learn about Uzbekistan, David?
I am super excited to learn about Uzbekistan.
What do you know about Uzbekistan?
I know that they're in Central Asia and used to be part of the Soviet Union. I know that this is their first World Cup.
True.
I know that they play in AFC. And their nickname's the White Wolves.
Those are good facts. Feel free to interject at any point here if you have questions, thoughts, concerns.
I will.
We're going to start off with the Wikipedia portion of the podcast here, where I tell you that Uzbekistan is a Central Asian country that is only one of two double landlocked nations on Earth. Meaning you have to cross at least two international borders to reach an ocean or sea.
Is
only two on Earth.
Is the other one Liechtenstein?
It fucking is. I knew it. I knew you'd know that. Let's go. I even wrote a note to ask you what the other one was. Liechtenstein is the other. To be fair, there is just a single international border to the Caspian Sea, but the Caspian Sea, you may know, is a landlocked body of water, or an endorheic basin, which is so fun, aka no outflow to other bodies of water. So we're off to a great start in terms of geography and facts here. The Uzbeks are actually bordered by 5 countries, all the stands: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan, all which exist for Americans listening to the pod who may not know. The Uzbeks they're the most populous country of those, though. North of 38 million people, which is a lot more than I would have guessed going into this. It's a pretty big country, not just area-wise. They speak Uzbek, but that's gone through many variations, but they do now use the Latin alphabet, which was not even the case maybe 100 years ago, because it's an insanely old region of the world. This is very important to remember throughout this podcast. The first settlers dated back to 8th to 6th century BC of sort of Iranian descent. They went through many periods of empire, Iranian, Greek for a bit, back to Iranian, and then the Muslim conquest of Persia in the 7th century, which spread Islam through the world. This is David's favorite of the part of the podcast because he is a history major. At one point, the region became rich thanks to its location on the Silk Road, which is a fact people kind of know about Uzbekistan. Ran straight through what is now the modern borders. But this period of the Islamic Golden Age came crashing to a halt because of who, David?
What time period is this?
Invaded by the Mongols.
Yeah.
Genghis Khan. And the capital of the subsequent Timurid Empire was in the Uzbek city of Samarkand, which is still, I think, their third biggest city now. Then they were steadily swallowed up by the Russians over the course of centuries. Tashkent became became like the political center of the region. That area of pre-Soviet Russian steady conquering. 1924 is when Russian Turkistan, was broken down into territorial units, national territorial units within the USSR. And that is when the defined region of Uzbekistan became sort of what we knew it is today, or delineated by borders. And like all USSR territories, declared independence in the early 90s and 91. So it's both a very young country and a very old country. Most of the population is Muslim, mostly Sunni. although it is technically a secular nation. We're going to get into this now because, in keeping with region and history, it is essentially an authoritarian centralized government, though they do have what we would call a president who is elected. Um, the president, though, essentially appoints everybody else in the government. Had the same president for the first 25 years, who died in 2016, and have had the same president since 2016. Any questions so far as we get into the horrible political history of the country in modern times?
Yeah. So in the fallout of the Soviet occupation, is the government mostly been Islamic, or has it been like, have the leaders been Islamic people, or have they been atheist or Orthodox? Like, is this it's a Muslim majority country, but is that represented in their government?
It's complicated. The USSR, I think, inflicted quite a lot of religious persecution on the local Muslim population. Let me double check, actually.
Did just click on their current president, and his daughter heads the presidential administration of Uzbekistan. His eldest son-in-law and youngest son-in-law both currently hold positions within the administration as well. So it's a very, us in America might be used to this, right? It's a family affair when it comes to running the country.
Yeah, the most famous ruler in the Soviet period was Sharif Rashidov.
Mm-hmm.
They were not. They were ethnically Uzbeks.
Okay.
Not appointed by from Russia or anything, but they were legally forced to be atheists in keeping with the rules of the Soviet rules.
Okay.
But there's a lot of complicated fallout of religion stuff as a result of all this mixing and various forms of oppression for so long. So the president who died in 2016, he was the president for the first 25 years of the country. He big on economic isolationism. Since then, in the last 10 years, they've opened up a lot more to Western and Eastern powers alike. This quote, though, per Amnesty International, freedom of expression remained under threat, with activists and journalists facing politically motivated prosecutions and travel restrictions. Authorities continued to stall reforms addressing impunity for torture and other ill treatment. Forced evictions and demolitions targeting marginalized communities persisted. LGBTQI people faced systemic discrimination and rights violations. Farmers were coerced into cotton production under threat of land loss. Despite environmental pledges, severe air pollution posed serious health risks. This is actually a significant improvement, though, from 10 years ago, if you can believe that, when the Human Rights Watch said that Uzbekistan's record of cooperation with the United Nations human rights mechanisms is arguably among the worst in the world, which is, I didn't realize was quite that severe. Small steps have been taken under Shavkat, the new guy. Yeah, the former PM and president since Islam Karimov died in 2016. 10 years before that, Uzbekistan was which would have been 2006. Uzbekistan was included in Freedom House, quote, the worst of the worst, the most repressive societies. So they've had rather a long way to go since that point. They have. You want to hear some things they've done since Mirziyoyev? This is such a hard one for me to say.
Yeah.
Mirziyoyev, Shavkat,
This is going to get us demonetized.
Mirziyoyev.
Yes,
oh my god, you try to say it. Shavkat. Since he took over, here are some things that I've recently done that are progress. David, you ready? 1, they have eradicated forced child labor. Woo!
Pretty good.
Number 2, domestic violence has been criminalized.
That's
you know when they did
good.
that? 3 years ago.
Oh.
Number 3,
Progress.
they've released some journalists and political prisoners from, prison. And some light journalism is maybe being encouraged, but not anything that's critical to the government, God forbid. 4, they're trying to torture fewer people less often. 5, religious freedom slightly more relaxed, but only slightly.
I mean, if they're trying to torture people less often, they're going in the opposite direction of our country. So, that's good. They're making progress.
So this is per an Athletic article from Tim Spears, great journalist with them, who I believe visited Uzbekistan before the World Cup. This is a quote that says, "Teachers and nurses would pick cotton from September to November. That was the reality of 10 years ago," says Akbar Yusupov, who was editor-in-chief of the English-language newspaper, the Tashkent Times. If a Western journalist traveled here before September 2016, there were no ATMs, no currency exchange offices. You'd need identification just to enter a bank. You weren't even allowed to take pictures in a metro station. It was a North Korea light, basically. Pretty extreme to a degree I was not actually familiar with. I knew very little about Uzbekistan until a few years ago.
I guess this is kind of why we knew so little about it, though. If it's...
This is why I was surprised it's such a large country for population. Mm-hmm. But they've suffered through this like severe isolationism for so many generations that it's all sort of new, and I think integration will take quite a long time into some more modern held beliefs. But where does football fit into all of this, David? Well, first teams were founded in 1912. Football Championship of the Uzbek SSR, founded in 1926, had a mix of pro and semi-pro clubs. Paktator played in the top tier of USSR football for 22 seasons, and in perhaps most famous internationally for a tragedy in 1979, where during a flight to play Dynamo Minsk, their plane was involved in a mid-air collision over Ukraine. Everybody died, including 17 players and staff for the club. So the Soviet Football Association made every other top flight give them 3 players so they could redraft a team. And then they were also barred for relegation from 3 years as a sorry, everybody on your team died consolation. So the USSR wasn't all bad, Yeah. Very fair in some ways. 3 years after that horrible tragedy, they finished 6th in the league, the USSR league, the highest in the history in the Soviet pyramid that any Uzbek team has finished. As in, it's only them, but their highest finish. So pretty remarkable. The Uzbek Super League replaced this after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. It has 16 first division clubs, a couple of lower tiers as well, mostly made up of youth teams. Paktator being still the most successful. They have 16 titles in that time. Here's a fun fact for you, David. Which famous South American footballer led the Uzbek League in goals in 2009 for title-winning club Bunyodkor?
It sounds like someplace Ronaldinho might have popped up for a second.
It's close. It's close. It's the right era. It's the right country.
Okay. Right country. Rivaldo could have been there.
Correct. It was Rivaldo. What a pull.
I was like, who were the guys that kind of just bounced around and refused to retire?
Yeah, they're like a little South Korea, a little...
Yeah.
Think about how insane it is, given everything I just said about the isolationism and like the level of oppression in the country, that Rivaldo was playing domestic football there in 2009. What's going on?
What his life must have been like that year is
it's so strange.
Impossible to comprehend. Yeah.
Impossible to know. I'm sure he had special treatment because he was Rivaldo, though. Yeah. But back to international stuff. They founded their national team in 1928. While they had all their own national teams, the USSR nations mostly played one another, including at the Spartakiad of Peoples of the USSR, which is just like the most Soviet name you could ever have for something sporting. The best they did was the 1986 edition of this, where they finished second. They lost to Ukraine in the final. But of course, their story really begins here in 92 when the modern era of the team was founded.
So pre-dissolution of the Soviet Union, right? Like they had their own national team, but
yes,
for the big sporting events, they would have been theoretically part of the Soviet Union if any of their players were good enough. Which, I mean, do you know if anyone had like?
I mean, they had players playing in the domestic league, but playing for the USSR at major tournaments, I don't believe so.
I assume at some point somebody from Uzbekistan got a cap at very least, but not enough to be like a notable part of the team, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so it looks like a couple of them maybe who played for Paktator in those eras. One named Barador Abdurrahimov, who played for Paktator. He was the top scorer at one point in the Soviet League, and Mikhail An, who was these are youth team. I don't know if they had caps for the senior team, but they definitely played at the youth level.
Okay.
Oh, a goalkeeper from Paktator also, named Yuri, and I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his last name because it's like 20 letters. But he earned, it says, multiple caps for the senior team.
Okay.
Yeah, so it did happen, I guess, but not super frequently. But yeah, mostly as Uzbek, Soviet Uzbek, they just played other Soviet countries. In '92, the White Wolves were officially founded. They played their first proper international match as a free nation against Tajikistan, their neighbor. They drew 2-2, and they achieved membership in the AFC in '94. The big moment the early moment in their international history was the 1994 Asian Games, hosted in Japan. They traveled to their first major tournament outside the USSR. They shocked the Saudis in the group. They beat Turkmenistan in the quarters, and then stunned a South Korea team that had just appeared at the World Cup in the US earlier that year, to make the final, where they beat China 4-2. They captured their only major trophy in their history at this tournament. It was just 2 years after their foundation and 3 years after their independence. How about that?
Wow, setting a high standard.
Indeed. Unfortunately for them, their status in the AFC, though, would mostly be related to their failure to qualify for the World Cup in the coming decades, because they got a little bit of a reputation as Asian chokers. And I don't mean that like in a sexual way. Yeah, so in 2006, they made it to the final stage of Asian qualifying, where they came up against Bahrain in a two-legged playoff. 2005. They won the first leg 1-0. However, David, controversy, one of the great FIFA controversies is about to ensue. Quote, they were incensed this is Uzbekistan, after a bizarre incident during this game where a penalty was disallowed for an attacking player encroaching rather than retaking the penalty. A free kick was awarded to Bahrain, who subsequently kept within sight of a two-legged playoff in November against the fourth team from the CONCACAF region. So yeah, essentially they're playing this last tie, and then would then go and play a CONCACAF team, which turned out to be Trinidad and Tobago, in a playoff as well, and that team would have made the World Cup. This is as good a chance as you'll ever have, right? Bahrain and then Trinidad and Tobago. It's about as easy a path as you'll ever get in this situation. But of course, they were only rewarded with a 1-goal win instead of 2 because of this penalty incident. The Uzbeks called for an investigation after the game, but what FIFA did instead lives in Asian football lore, David. They decided the game would be replayed, rendering the Uzbek win null and void.
That doesn't seem right.
Does not. It seems pretty wild. You know who the coach, by the way, for the Uzbeks was at that time? Another person you'll never get.
I have no idea.
It was Bobby Houghton.
What's he doing there? What's Bobby?
His quote afterwards was, the Bureau... FIFA said the Bureau, taking into consideration the referee in the match in question has indeed committed a technical error, established that, as a consequence, the match needed to be replayed. Bobby Houghton said, we feel it could have been a bigger victory, but I don't know what the referee was doing with that decision. The referee stole our second goal, and now FIFA is stealing our first goal. That's what he and the UFF head of international relations said. I think both are probably fair statements, and things would only get worse from there because they replayed the first leg a month later and only managed a 1-1 draw. And then the return leg away finished goalless, meaning the aggregate was 1-1 and away goals applied. So Bahrain went through.
Oof.
And then, to make it even worse, then lost to Trinidad and Tobago in the Inter-Confederation playoff.
I will say that Trinidad and Tobago team, pretty solid. That's the
Pretty
Shaka
good team, yeah.
Hislop in goal, Dennis
Yeah.
Lawrence, old Dwight York, and Kenwin Jones. Kenwin Jones,
Yeah.
underrated player.
Fun team.
Yeah.
Fun team. But because of all that, the Uzbeks were traumatized as a footballing nation. I mean, it's a totally unbelievable disgrace. 2010, moving on, they made the final group stage of qualifying, but finished last in that group. 2014, in the third round of qualifiers, Uzbeks topped a group featuring Japan and went into the fourth round with tons of confidence. They had to finish top 2 in this group with Iran, South Korea, Qatar, and Lebanon. Not easy. By the way, Asian qualifying, I learned doing this, is fucking nuts. Like, there are so many rounds.
Dude, it's
There's
insane.
so many, the grouping is insane. It makes no sense. But thus begins another heartbreaking chapter in their history, David, because in the first match day, they lost to Iran in the 93rd minute. They drew Lebanon, then rebounded with draws against Korea, and a win over Qatar, a win over Iran, and a win over Lebanon. So a draw going in the penultimate game in Seoul would have been enough to keep them in the top 2, but they lost 1-0 and then finished third behind that same Korea team on 1 goal difference, shipping them to another playoff, this time against Jordan. Both legs ended 1-1. They went to pens, and then the Uzbeks lost 9-8 in a shootout.
And then that
And
Jordan
then guess
team
what?
got
Jordan didn't qualify
smashed
either.
by Uruguay, right?
Yeah, they got
Yeah,
mashed by
I
Uruguay,
remember.
yeah. So they wouldn't
Uruguay
have
beating
they wouldn't have
us.
made it then either. But 2018, they only made the third round of qualifying, once again missing out on the next round because of goal difference. 2022, again, did not qualify. In this case, they didn't make it to the final round of qualifying, partially because North Korea withdrew partway the groups because of COVID, and FIFA, in another stroke of brilliance, rendered all of their results null and void. And because Lebanon drew and lost against North Korea, their negative goal difference was reneged, and then they qualified ahead of Uzbeks in like best third place teams for the next round.
That's insane.
So, I mean, it's just one thing after another.
Yeah.
But finally, in 2026, the chokers of Asian football, who have also had spectacularly bad luck, finally had their moment. They expanded World Cup, extra slots for the Asian nations. This has to be the cycle, right? This talented group, unfortunately drawn into a second round group with Iran, but they finished second to that regional powerhouse, still on goal difference, but they did finish second. In the next round, they just needed to finish top 2 again to go directly to the World Cup. And this time with the game to spare, they finally got it over the line.
And they were behind Iran again in that group as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Much to explain why one qualifying group features these 2 teams and then the next qualifying group features the exact same 2 teams. Like what is that? Why? And it's the same 2 teams who have to play all these games only to finish in the exact same spots and qualify directly. Like, what is it? Doesn't make any sense. Take a breath. They finally made the World Cup. The current roster. So, the other name for the White Wolves that I've heard is Asian Italy, because they play in the past they've played a pretty compact defensive catenaccio, if you will, brand of football. They're mostly made up of players that play domestically, a few in Iran and UAE, but the few notable exceptions are paving the way for this new generation of talent. I'm sure you've heard of Eldor Shomurodov, the captain. He has 95 caps, 45 international goals to his name. Moved to Russia in 2017 and then played in Italy for 6 seasons. He's now at Başakşehir, alongside another exciting youngster, Aboshek Fazuliev, who started in the World Cup. We got familiar with him. He scored their first ever goal in the World Cup against Colombia, which at the time was an equalizer. He's just 22. But of course, Kusanov, another 22-year-old, is their most famous player because he plays for Manchester City. City bought him off of Lens at the age of 20, and he had an enormously fast rise to that level because he was an Uzbek youth product, moved to a Belarusian club, and then to Lens, and then to City, all within like 3 to 4 years. He said, in a Guardian quote, "In Belarus, I suffered away from my parents. Often there were training sessions 3 times a day. if there was heavy snow in winter, we would clear the fields ourselves and then train. So you never really escape the Sovietness of it all, do you? But now he's at this exceptional level, and it seems like the new leadership has really emphasized in government is prioritizing infrastructure of the youth level. Even Arsene Wenger has noted this. I don't know if he visited or what, but he works for FIFA now because he's a sellout. In that same 2022, or in that same Tim Spears Athletic article in 2022, government announced they'd built 3,500 mini football fields across the country, as well as many sporting centers. They're opening a brand new national stadium next year. You could see this in the youth level as well, but beyond the Kusanov of it all, the U17s knocked out England at the U17 World Cup in 2023. The U20s won the Asian Cup that same year. So I would not be surprised if this is like with this 48 team World Cup, if this is just a regular occurrence to see the Uzbeks at this stage every 4 years. And if that's the case, it would be interesting to plot their growth as we go, because they didn't have a great time, did they, at the World Cup?
It's weird too because they appointed Fabio Cannavaro in October of, I guess, 25, which is after they'd qualified. And
would you like to know why?
I would like to know why, because I don't know why Karpadze, who was the manager who led them through most of qualifying, was like
not true. So the guy that got them a large way through the qualifying cycle was Srećko Katanić, who had been their coach for years, the famous Slovenian footballer. He retired officially in 2025 due to health reasons. And so
but that was like January 25, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Were
So they played like the next 7 months with the interim. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe. I don't think he was ever officially appointed.
I didn't realize he
and
was
then they
from during that period.
Yeah, they decided to make a splash in that fall when Cannavaro came on, but they've since in the Katanić era they've run that 3-4-3 for the most part. So Cannavaro didn't really upend the tactics almost at all. He mostly kept continuity there, but his big the idea of bringing him in and his big thing was like mentality monsters. He said, quote, "I want warriors. I want high intensity always. Fighters," which is very him, but also like trying to merge their already in place sort of tactical setup with like this bit of a killer instinct to play on the world stage. But how'd they do? Well, this is another Cannavaro quote from after the couple of games from a BN article where he said, "The World Cup is brutal." They gave everything? Yes. They are sad in the changing room. Wow, my friend, believe me. They suffer more than anyone in Uzbekistan. I don't feel good because I don't like to lose. We made some mistakes, of course, but I cannot complain about my players. I mean, I think and then he goes on to talk about investing more in academies, whatever. But I do think it was we were pretty positive on this Uzbek team coming into the tournament as not as a dark horse, but as like a team that could, surprisingly compete a little bit in the groups. The problem was they were in such a good group because Congo was better than we thought. And Portugal and Colombia, of course, are top 10 teams. It was a reminder of how challenging it is to get thrown into the deep end, I think, in a tournament like that. And we saw a couple of the other Asian teams that, Jordan, another debutant, who we were high on. Iraq, I thought at times looked pretty competent, but couldn't cope over the 90-minute period. They hadn't been in the World Cup in 50 years. Mm-hmm. It's I think it's more of a reminder of the Asian, what it's going to take for some of these Central Asian and Middle Eastern teams to compete on that level with regularity, because the difference between them and like Cabo Verde is pretty enormous. And in DR Congo, these teams who also were either new or hadn't been there in forever, essentially new in Congo's case. It's just a whole different level. Like those are, even if they're not always at the highest level, those roster full of players are all playing in Europe or big African clubs. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have at some point of like how long is it going to take and how much investment is it going to take for some of these countries to like graduate to like making it out of a group stage at a World Cup,
Yeah, because it's a big difference between being able to get to the World Cup and being able to advance at the World Cup, at least right now. If it continues to expand to 64, maybe
Which
it becomes a
God
little.
forbid, man.
Yeah, it's
Jesus Christ.
a little too. And I'm just gonna interject. If you think it's about getting Italy into the World Cup, is why they want to expand it to 64, you're really stupid. It's about getting countries like Bahrain, China, and India into the World Cup.
Hmm.
Speaking of China and Italy, do you know Fabio Cannavaro managed China for 2 games as a caretaker manager?
he, he doesn't exactly have a great coaching pedigree, does he?
Dude, it's such a weird career. He starts
Yeah.
with Guangzhou Evergrande during like the period where China was investing a ton of money.
Yeah.
Um, Moves to Al Nasser before the Saudis are investing money. Then goes back to China for Tianjin and then back to Guangzhou. Seems like it went well there. Then he's in Benevento, Udinese, Zagreb. All 3 go poorly. He doesn't last half a season at any of those 3 clubs.
Yeah.
And then Uzbekistan's like, that's our guy.
I mean, I can understand their thinking, and it kind of raises their profile and makes them feel a little bit like legitimate, like a sense of belonging. Like we have a World Cup winner here to like guide these players through adversity and all the mentality challenges. They ended up, I mean, they wanted to play in that 3-4-3. It's what they played in all their friendlies leading up to it. And then immediately they have to shift back into a more defensive 4-5-1. And then, but I thought, all that being said, they played like pretty bravely against Colombia, and they played pretty well against Congo too. And they lost both games 3-1, I think, right?
Mhm.
Or was Congo 2-1?
I knew it was 3-1.
Took the lead against Congo, were level for a little while against Colombia, and like held out. So 2 of the games went pretty well, I thought, considering where Congo ended up on, like, it's going to be much higher in our power rankings after the tournament than they started, given with what we saw from them. And it was really just the Portugal game where they were sort of embarrassed. That's not bad. Like, it's not bad. They didn't do that bad. And the last, Colombia tacked in like a third in like the 98th minute of stoppage time too. So that, and it wasn't a disaster, I don't think. I think they can be pretty proud of the performance overall. And it's definitely something to build on. And that's like first Central Asian country to really even sniff qualifying is still a pretty big deal, and sort of setting the example for that. It's just going to take time. Much like the country's like changing politics, it's just going to take time. Things just don't happen overnight as much as centralized dictatorships or whatever want them to. So I think that all in all, these are all positive developments, and we'll just have to watch and see.
Kusanov is a sign of things to come. I mean, then they're developing players and putting them in a position to succeed. They also have Fazuliev's only 22, and he was one of the big stars of the team. So, like,
see if he gets some better play at Basaksehir here next year. He was,
so there's definitely players that are promising, going to be part of the team for a while.
Yeah, but anyway, I had a good time researching this because it's such a unusual, unique situation and part of the world that we know little about in our sheltered American lives. Yeah. So I enjoyed it. Anything else to say before we go here, David?
I guess my question is, who do we cheers to? Do we cheers to the manager who got them here?
Country.
To Fabio?
No, in my policy, I'm not cheersing to an Italian about Uzbekistan.
That's fair, especially because he only took over for the World Cup. And,
indeed. Let's cheers to the footballing nation of Uzbekistan.
Cheers.